I kept my wedding dress folded in a cedar box, tucked under the bed like a small chapel. The fabric had yellowed in places, but it still smelled of jasmine and rain. My husband used to say the dress carried the sound of our vows in its seams. On quiet afternoons, I'd touch the lace and hear his laugh in the corridor. People say memories fade. Mine learned how to hide in cotton and thread. I never wore it again, but I never stopped being the woman who did. The sleeves were delicate, hand-stitched by my mother's tired fingers. A single pearl button was slightly cracked from our first dance. I always told myself I was keeping it for a granddaughter's courage. Truth is, I kept it to remember the woman I promised to remain. It wasn't a rich woman's dress, only honest and patient. The hem carried a tiny stain of wine from our imperfect toast. If you looked close, you could see the seam I redid by candlelight. We had more hope than money, and it fit me better than silk. Some nights I'd slide the box out just to check if it still breathed. I would lift the lid as if opening a letter from God. My hands would tremble, not from age, but from reverence. I'd trace the neckline and feel my husband's warm palm at my back. The house felt less empty when the fabric was in my lap. I thought a promise needs a witness, even if it's made of cloth. When my son married, I didn't show the dress to anyone. I told myself it was not the right time for old stories. He seemed happy, and I wanted happiness to stand alone. But happiness is a fragile chair when pride keeps climbing on it. She arrived with perfume that erased the smell of home. Her voice was sweet when guests were near and sharp when they left. She called me mother the way people say receipt, necessary and dull. The first week, she rearranged the living room without asking. The second week, she said sunlight made the curtains look poor. By the third, I learned that silence can bruise just like words. I noticed how her eyes paused on the cedar box the first time she cleaned. She asked what was inside with a smile, too careful to trust. Memories, I said, and she laughed as if I'd said trash. I told her it was my wedding dress, and her mouth shaped a smirk. She asked if I planned to wear it to the kitchen. I said some clothes are worn by the heart, not the body. She rolled her eyes like a door that refuses to close gently. After that, she dusted around the box as if it were a stain. I began locking my bedroom when I left the house. Some things we guard not from thieves, but from mockery. I wished she could see what I saw when I looked at that dress. Not fabric, but a map of every soft victory we ever had. My husband building our first table with hands that shook. Me learning to mend because love is repair more than purchase. Two people choosing each other again after every disagreement. A family raised on soup, laughter, and a stubborn refusal to quit. I didn't need her adoration. I wanted only her respect. But respect is expensive to those who never paid for it themselves. I prayed for patience the way sailors pray for a shore. And I kept the key to my room on a ribbon around my neck. That evening, I took the dress out and laid it on the bed. The lace caught the last light, and the room looked like a chapel. I whispered my husband's name and thanked him for staying in the threads. Then I folded the sleeves over the bodice like hands at rest. I slid the cedar box back under the bed and locked the door. In the hallway, I heard her laugh spill like oil on tile. My son kissed my forehead, tired, already pulled in two directions. I told him dinner would be ready and not to worry about me. He didn't see the ribbon and key hidden beneath my collar. He didn't know I had just protected the last quiet part of us. The day she moved in, the house lost its old rhythm. Boxes covered the hallway, and her perfume spread faster than her words. She called the movers as if conducting an orchestra, sharp and precise. Every thud of furniture sounded like a command to forget the past. My son smiled, proud to bring his new wife home, blind to the shift in air. I made tea and tried to welcome her properly, but she declined with a grin. She said she only drank imported blends, the kind with taste. I nodded, pretending not to feel the insult dressed as preference. That's how it began. Not with shouting, but with rearranging. Politeness that scraped the soul like sandpaper on skin. She moved things around the living room as if testing ownership. My old photographs were too sentimental for her taste. She placed scented candles everywhere. The house smelled like a store. Even the curtains seemed embarrassed to hang the way they used to. My husband's chair was pushed into a corner to make space. I wanted to move it back, but my son's smile begged me not to. He said she had a good sense of design, that change was good. But change, I've learned, doesn't always come to improve. Sometimes it comes to erase. I watched her hum while folding new linens, singing victory quietly. It was then I realized the house no longer breathed like mine. At dinner, she complimented my cooking with a tone that twisted the praise. Old recipes, she said, they're comforting for people who like the past. My son laughed softly, not seeing the blade behind the words. I swallowed the bitterness like soup that burned the tongue. She spoke about her parents' wealth, her education, her travels. Every sentence built a wall higher than her smile could climb. When she said, "We'll modernize everything," she meant me too. She wanted a home without history, walls without whispers. I smiled back, the way soldiers smile before a losing war. My silence became my last form of dignity. That night, I sat alone by the window, watching the reflection of candles. The flames flickered like arguments waiting to happen. I thought of my husband and how he used to calm storms with laughter. If he were here, she wouldn't dare move a single chair. But death makes the kind-hearted invisible and the living grow bold. I whispered to him, asking for strength I didn't know I'd need. The cedar box slept quietly under my bed, untouched, unseen. It was my last secret, my last piece of something unbroken. The house echoed differently now, hollow and sharp. Even the clock ticked as if choosing sides. In the following days, her dominance grew roots. She began inviting friends over without asking. They spoke loudly, laughed louder, and never noticed me. One of them called me the sweet old lady in the background. My son looked embarrassed, but said nothing. Fear disguised as peace. I washed their dishes afterward, my hands trembling not from age but anger. It's strange how quickly a stranger can claim your silence. I started to feel like a guest in the home I had built. Even the floorboards creaked differently under her heels. Each sound was a reminder. Something sacred was being replaced. I decided to keep the peace, or at least pretend to. I told myself she was young, that time would soften her edges. But deep down, I felt something shifting, not just in her, but in me. A quiet rebellion started growing where patience used to live. The kind that doesn't shout, only watches and remembers. Every word, she said, became a line in a story I never meant to write. And though she didn't know it yet, she had already awakened the woman who stitched strength into lace. Because some wars begin long before the fire starts. They start with a single look of disdain. And I had just seen the first spark. Sunday lunch used to be sacred in our family. It was the day laughter echoed from the kitchen to the porch. The smell of roasted herbs meant peace, not war. But that Sunday, the air felt heavier, as if it already knew. I woke early, cooked slowly, putting love into every dish. My son helped me set the table, distracted, smiling nervously. When she entered the kitchen, her perfume clashed with the garlic. She looked at the food and frowned, like beauty refusing simplicity. "Smells strong," she said, glancing at my son for validation. He just chuckled, unaware that he was feeding her cruelty. I told her the stew was my husband's favorite. She raised an eyebrow and said, "I can tell. Men from that generation liked heavy meals." The tone was sugar-coated, but the bitterness dripped through every word. My son shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to hear the insult. I kept stirring, my hand steady though my heart wasn't. She sat down and scrolled through her phone, ignoring the table's warmth. When I brought the bread, she laughed softly. "You still bake it yourself. That's cute." Her friends would call it a joke. I called it erosion. I realized then that humiliation doesn't always shout. Sometimes it giggles. And the giggle of the cruel lasts longer than the cry of the kind. When we began eating, she spoke of modern living. She said women today didn't need to spend their lives in kitchens. My son smiled weakly, as if balancing love and loyalty in his mouth. I said softly, "Cooking isn't slavery. It's love made edible." She looked up, eyes sharp. Or maybe it's a way to feel needed. The table fell silent, forks pausing midair. My son cleared his throat, changed the subject too late. I smiled, but it wasn't forgiveness, it was armor. There are moments when silence becomes a weapon sharper than words. And that day, I learned to sharpen mine. After lunch, she offered to clean, but not out of kindness. She stacked plates loudly, sighing at every stain as if blaming me. When I tried to help, she said, "No, you've done enough." "Really?" The really landed like a slap. My son kissed her cheek, thinking peace had been restored. But I saw the spark in her eyes, the joy of a small victory. She was testing me, measuring how much disrespect I could swallow. And I let her, because I wanted to know the depth of her cruelty. People reveal themselves not in arguments, but in smiles. And hers was the kind that cuts from the inside out. That night, I replayed her words in my mind like a broken record. "She just doesn't understand," my son said, trying to excuse her tone. But disrespect isn't misunderstanding, it's intention in disguise. I sat by the window, hands folded, remembering the years I spent building this family. All I wanted was peace, not obedience. But peace built on silence is only the calm before collapse. I looked at the cedar box under my bed and whispered to it, "She will not touch you." Because the dress was more than fabric, it was the last thread of dignity I owned. And deep inside, I knew the war had already begun. Only she didn't know what kind of woman she was provoking. That night, I dreamed of white lace and candlelight. The church bells rang faintly in my sleep, as if time had mercy. I was 21 again, nervous, clutching the bouquet too tight. My husband stood at the altar, eyes full of promise and trembling devotion. He wasn't a rich man, but his soul was generous like dawn. I could still feel the rough fabric of his suit against my fingers. The photographer's flash froze our youth in a single heartbeat. And when he whispered, "You look like tomorrow," I believed him. That dress wasn't just what I wore, it was what I became. A woman who believed that love could build a world from dust. I remember sewing the hem myself 2 nights before the wedding. The candle flickered as I worked, light trembling like my hands. My mother warned me that a perfect stitch attracts jealousy. She said, "Leave one thread loose, so God knows you're humble." So I did, and maybe that's the thread that still binds my soul. The day after the ceremony, I refused to wash the dress. The small red wine stain on the skirt looked like a wound of joy. It wasn't a flaw, it was proof that love is messy and sacred. Every spot on that fabric carried a story, not a mistake. And every story, I swore, would stay safe in my keeping. Years later, when my husband passed, I took out the box. The cedar smell hit me like a ghost wearing cologne. I laid the dress on our bed and sat beside it for hours. There were still traces of his touch, invisible but certain. I wept, but not out of sorrow. It was gratitude disguised as grief. I whispered that he had kept his promise, that love had endured. The fabric seemed to glow faintly under the lamplight, as if the years themselves refused to dull its purpose. I folded it carefully, pressing the air out like sealing a memory, and slid it beneath the bed, where it became my secret altar. Sometimes I thought of giving it to my granddaughter one day. I imagined her smile, her innocence, her hands trembling like mine once did. But life gave me a different kind of heir, one who burned rather than blessed. It's strange how destiny can twist the shape of what you love most. I used to believe every woman could understand the holiness of memory. Now I know some hearts are too loud to hear whispers from the past. My daughter-in-law saw only an old dress. I saw a lifetime stitched in silence. To her, it was clutter. To me, it was confession. And in that difference, the storm began to grow. I just didn't know it would come dressed as fire. The next morning, I polished the frame of our wedding photo. Her reflection appeared beside mine, uninvited, in the glass. She asked, "Do you ever regret not living more fully?" I smiled gently and said, "My fullness was love, not noise." She shrugged, uninterested in the weight of my truth. Her phone buzzed, and she walked away mid-sentence. I looked back at the photograph and saw the innocence she mocked. But I also saw strength, the kind born from patience, not pride. I promised my younger self that I wouldn't let her destroy that memory, even if the price of peace would soon be ashes. It was my idea to host the family dinner. I thought maybe warmth could melt the ice forming between us. I cooked all morning, letting the smell of rosemary fill the house. Each dish was a prayer disguised as a recipe. By sunset, the table was glowing, the kind of glow that hides cracks. My son brought wine, proud to see the family together again. She arrived last, late but loud, dressed like a secret she wanted everyone to see. Her heels echoed through the hallway like a drumbeat of dominance. She smiled at everyone but me, and that was enough to darken the room. Still, I told myself, endure, love always asks for one more try. Dinner began softly, with small talk and laughter too rehearsed. She complimented the food, her tone syrupy, her eyes cold. "Your mother is so traditional," she said, sipping wine. "It's charming." The word charming tasted like poison pretending to be honey. Everyone laughed politely, including my son. I forced a smile, swallowing the humiliation with the stew. Then she looked around and said, "I saw something interesting in your mother's room." The table went quiet. My hand froze halfway to my mouth. She leaned back and added, "An old wedding dress from another century, I think." Someone chuckled. My son's eyes flickered with unease. "Oh, that dress," I said calmly, trying to keep peace in my tone. "It's from my wedding. I've kept it all these years." She raised her eyebrows theatrically. "Really? That old thing?" I thought it was a costume. The room filled with awkward laughter, the kind that hides discomfort. I felt the blood rise in my cheeks, but my voice stayed even. Some things don't age. They just remember. Her lips curved. Or maybe they just rot slower than others. My son coughed, saying, "That's enough." But the damage was done. In her smile, I saw not a woman, but the echo of every cruelty unpunished. And I knew then, she wasn't mocking a dress. She was mocking the woman inside it. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced smiles. Her stories grew louder, her laughter too long, too sharp. Every sentence she spoke seemed designed to erase me from the table. I kept quiet because sometimes dignity sounds like silence. But silence doesn't mean surrender. It means gathering strength quietly. When she poured herself more wine, she glanced at me again. "You should let me help you modernize," she said. "That dress could be recycled." The table laughed, thinking it was harmless humor. I excused myself before my tears betrayed me. Behind the door, I exhaled the kind of pain that only mothers understand. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, listening to them eat. Their laughter spilled like water down a cracked wall. I looked out the window and saw the moon hanging over the yard, indifferent. I whispered to my husband's memory, "She doesn't know what she's playing with." I thought of the dress, folded under my bed, patient and pure. It had survived time, dust, grief, and now it had become a target. I ran my fingers over the locket I wore, feeling its heartbeat. There's a kind of pain that doesn't destroy, it distills. That night, I understood. She hadn't insulted my past. She had awakened my purpose. The morning after that dinner, the air felt heavier. I could still hear her laughter echoing through the walls. It wasn't just noise, it was conquest. She moved around the kitchen humming, as if the night had crowned her queen. I made coffee in silence, watching the steam rise like unspoken words. My son left early for work, kissing us both as if peace truly lived there. The moment his car disappeared, the mask fell. She sighed loudly, dropped her cup into the sink. "Your stew was too salty," she said. "But I guess that's how you people used to cook." I turned slowly, meeting her eyes for the first time without fear. "I didn't know kindness had an expiration date," I said quietly. She smiled, the kind of smile that demands surrender. "I'm just saying," she continued, "this house could use new energy. Maybe fewer old memories lying around." Her words weren't about the house. They were aimed at me. I wiped the counter, pretending not to care, but my chest burned. The past built this house, I whispered. You're just living in it. For a second, she froze. The truth had grazed her vanity. Then she laughed softly, shaking her head. You should thank me, you know. I'm bringing life back here. I looked around and saw only decay blooming in her shadow. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway, toward my bedroom. I felt my stomach tighten, a mother's instinct when danger nears what she loves. I saw that box again, she said, pretending nonchalance. You guard it like it's treasure. I dried my hands, keeping my voice calm. It is. She smirked. It's just fabric. You can't eat it, you can't sell it, and honestly, it's ugly. I said nothing. Some things don't need defending. But silence, to the cruel, sounds like permission. She stepped closer, eyes glinting with arrogance. Maybe I'll take a look inside one day, just to see what's worth all that dust. I met her gaze and said, touch it, and you'll learn what ghosts are made of. She flinched, not from fear, but from disbelief. To her, I was harmless, a relic, soft-spoken, breakable. But something in my tone unsettled her. She grabbed her purse and muttered, You're being dramatic. Maybe, I said, but drama begins where respect ends. For a moment, the house held its breath. Even the clock paused between seconds. She looked back once more, lips tight, eyes furious. Then she slammed the door behind her. The sound rang like thunder, and I knew that peace had just left my house for good. I sat down, heart pounding against my ribs like a warning drum. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part refused to. I thought of my husband again, of how he'd ask me to forgive. But forgiveness isn't weakness, it's timing. And this wasn't the time to forgive, it was the time to remember. The dress came to mind. White, patient, silent. It had survived more storms than this one, and so had I. But as I looked at the sunlight slipping through the curtains, I knew one truth. The next time she crossed that line, something would break. And neither of us would come out the same. It began like any ordinary afternoon. Cruel days always do. I was watering the garden when I smelled smoke. At first, I thought it came from a neighbor's barbecue. But the wind carried something different, sharper, intimate. It was the scent of burning fabric and cedar, the scent of memory dying. My heart skipped, then raced so hard it hurt to breathe. I ran inside, the hose still running behind me, water spilling like panic. The hallway was thick with smoke, curling like ghosts along the ceiling. And through the haze, I saw her silhouette, calm, deliberate, merciless. She was standing by my open bedroom door, holding a lighter. Her voice was soft when she spoke, almost amused. I told you this house needed new energy. On the floor, the cedar box lay open, my secret altar desecrated. The dress, half pulled from its wrapping, was already catching flame. She watched it burn as if watching herself in a mirror. I screamed her name, but it came out strangled, like a prayer denied. She turned slowly, smiling, her eyes reflecting the fire's glow. You should have let go of the past, she said. Now it's gone. I tried to reach for it, but the flames roared louder than my grief. And in that sound, something inside me snapped, quietly, forever. I grabbed a blanket and threw it over the fire, coughing through the smoke. But the fire had already kissed too much of what mattered. The lace disintegrated, turning into flakes of white snow that stung my skin. I felt like I was watching my life crumble in reverse. The room crackled with heat and betrayal, each spark a word unsaid. She stood there, arms crossed, untouched by remorse. When the last ember dimmed, only the bodice remained, scorched, fragile, but not gone. I knelt beside it, hands shaking, eyes blurred with disbelief. The smell of ashes mixed with jasmine, my past and present colliding. And I whispered, You burned the wrong thing. She rolled her eyes. It's just a dress, for God's sake. I lifted my gaze slowly, feeling a calm she couldn't understand. No, I said, my voice steady. It was a promise, one you'll never make. She laughed, loud, hollow, victorious, and walked away. But behind her laughter, I saw something flicker, fear or confusion. Because even in ruin, the dress glowed faintly beneath the ash. Something had survived, something not meant for her eyes. I touched the charred fabric and felt a hidden seam still intact. Inside, the corner of an envelope peeked out, untouched by flame. The fire had revealed what it was meant to destroy. I held the half-burned letter close to my chest. The handwriting on the corner was unmistakable, my husband's. My tears blurred the ink, but his name remained clear, stubborn, eternal. The room fell silent, except for the soft hiss of dying fire. I realized then that her cruelty had done what time never could. It had uncovered the secret he left behind for me. The universe has strange ways of protecting what must be found. And she, without knowing, had become the instrument of her own undoing. I looked at the ashes, calm now, no longer trembling. Sometimes, the unforgivable act is just the beginning of revelation. The house didn't breathe the same after that day. The air turned heavy, clinging to my lungs like guilt. Every corner smelled of burned lace and forgotten prayers. I opened the windows, but the smoke refused to leave. It had soaked into the curtains, the walls, my skin. I wiped the furniture, but the scent of loss stayed stubborn. It wasn't just the smell of fire, it was the smell of truth exposed. I walked through the rooms as if through a graveyard of memories. The silence was thick, sacred, and cruelly calm. Even the light coming through the window seemed afraid to touch me. On the table, the half-burned fabric rested like a wounded bird. Its edges were black, curling inward as if hiding the secret it revealed. I ran my fingers along the ash, careful not to crush what remained. The letter peeked from beneath the charred silk, untouched, miraculous. My hands trembled as I picked it up, his handwriting still alive. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, like heaven and hell sharing a breath. I whispered his name, afraid that saying it aloud would break the spell. It felt as if time had folded in on itself, bringing him back for one last message. The smoke swirled around me, slow and deliberate, like a spirit waiting to be heard. And I knew, some fires are lit by destiny, not hatred. She came to the doorway then, her expression unreadable. Maybe she expected to see me broken, sobbing in defeat. Instead, she found me calm, seated beside the ashes like a priestess. "Are you happy now?" I asked, voice steady as stone. She shrugged. "It's just stuff. You'll get over it." I smiled, not from peace, but from knowing what she didn't. "You burned what you could touch," I said. "Not what mattered." Her eyes flickered, unsure of what I meant. She turned away quickly, muttering something about cleaning up. But I saw her hand shake when she reached for the doorknob. That night, the house spoke through its silence. I sat with a candle lit beside the half-burned box. The shadows on the wall danced like memories refusing to die. I unfolded the letter halfway, but stopped. Fear had its own gravity. Part of me wanted to read it instantly. Another part needed to prepare. His handwriting carried weight, the kind that changes everything it touches. I pressed the paper against my chest and closed my eyes. Outside, the night wind pushed smoke through the window again. It wrapped around me, not choking but cleansing. And in that moment I knew the fire hadn't ended something. It had begun. I fell asleep on the floor, candle flickering beside me. Dreams came like whispers from another world. I saw my husband, younger, smiling, standing near the altar again. He said nothing, just looked at me with eyes full of mercy. Behind him, the flames from the dress glowed softly, not in rage, but in revelation. I woke before dawn, the air still scented with smoke and memory. The letter waited patiently, unburned, unread, alive. Some secrets choose their own moment to be spoken. And I had the feeling that this one was about to change everything. Because even ashes, when blessed by love, can still breathe. Morning came pale, almost ashamed to touch the house. I brewed coffee as usual, the smell mixing with the faint scent of ashes. Every cup, every clink of porcelain sounded too loud in the silence. When she entered the kitchen, her heels hesitated for the first time. "Good morning," she said lightly, though her voice cracked on the second word. I turned slowly, met her eyes. They were colder than ever, but unsteady. For a moment, we were two statues in the fog, neither willing to blink. Then I smiled, calm and deliberate. "Morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" She frowned, confused by my tone. Cruelty doesn't know what to do when met with peace. She poured herself coffee, avoiding my gaze. The silence between us stretched, tight as wire. I could see the question trembling behind her lips. Why isn't she crying? Because the cruel understand control, not composure. They feed on reaction, and I had decided to starve her of it. Her reflection trembled in the silver kettle, eyes dark and restless. She finally muttered, "I cleaned the room. There's nothing left." I nodded slowly. "Not everything burns." She froze, cup halfway to her mouth. Her pulse betrayed her calm. Guilt, even when denied, always blinks first. For the rest of the morning, she hovered around the house. She straightened picture frames that weren't crooked. She opened windows just to close them again. Restlessness clung to her like perfume too strong to wash away. I sat quietly, folding laundry that no longer needed folding. From the corner of my eye, I saw her stealing glances at me. Each time our eyes met, she looked away faster. That was the first time I saw fear flicker behind her coldness. Not fear of me. Fear of herself, of what she had done. She was beginning to smell her own conscience burning. My son returned that evening, cheerful and tired. He kissed her forehead, unaware of the ashes that clung to her smile. She talked too fast, laughed too loud, desperate to sound normal. He noticed something in her tone, but didn't know what it was. I served dinner as always, each gesture precise, almost ceremonial. She barely ate, picking at her food while pretending to listen. When our eyes met across the table, I saw her hand tremble. She knew I hadn't told him, yet. But my silence was heavier than accusation. It was the kind of silence that builds walls around truth until it echoes. That night, I heard her pacing the hallway. Her steps were frantic, uneven, searching for sleep that wouldn't come. I stayed in bed, eyes open, heart steady. The letter lay under my pillow, pulsing with secrets. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a confession. At one point, she stopped at my door, breathing, listening. For a long minute, neither of us moved. Then, quietly, she whispered, "You should have thrown it away." I smiled in the dark. Maybe it wasn't meant for me to lose. Her footsteps retreated, softer, but carrying the weight of dread. When morning came again, she wouldn't meet my gaze. She moved around the kitchen like a shadow trying to hide from light. The power had shifted, silently, irreversibly. I didn't need revenge. The truth was already doing its work. The fire had burned her confidence, not my spirit. Her eyes, once cold, now darted nervously at every flicker of light. And in that trembling, I saw what she couldn't yet see, that the real flame was no longer in my room, but in her soul. Because guilt burns slower than fire, but it never goes out. And she had only just begun to feel its heat. I waited until the house fell silent again. The moonlight crept across the floor, tracing a path toward the cedar box. Ash still clung to its edges like snow refusing to melt. My hands trembled as I lifted the letter, fragile as breath. His handwriting, elegant, firm, unmistakable, brought tears before words. It had been decades since I'd seen those loops and curves. I held it against my chest for a moment, afraid of what it might undo. Some truths, once read, don't return to silence. But love has its own way of choosing the right time to speak. And that night it finally did. The envelope opened with a sigh, as if it, too, had waited to exhale. Inside was a folded sheet, yellowed but intact. At the top, in his steady hand, was my name, "To my beloved, if life allows this to reach you." My breath caught in my throat. I read in whispers, as if speaking to a ghost. He wrote about the day he had sewn the letter into the lining of my dress. He said it was the only safe place, where love lived, where no greed could reach. He spoke of things he feared would surface after his passing. Family disputes, money, betrayal, the same shadows now walking my halls. And then, in words that cut deeper than fire, he confessed, "Our son must never lose what is rightfully yours." He wrote of a small inheritance hidden under my name alone, money he had saved quietly, fearing others would misuse it. He wrote of land left to me, documents sealed and entrusted to an old friend. He feared his family, especially his brother, might manipulate our boy one day. So he left instructions, encoded in a place only I would ever touch. He ended the letter with a plea, not a command. Guard it, my love. One day, fire may come, but not all flames destroy. My tears blurred the ink, but I read those words again and again. The smoke that had once felt like death now smelled like destiny. I folded the letter back carefully, pressing the corners as if healing a wound. The house was still, listening, maybe blessing. I sat there for a long time, surrounded by silence and the scent of cedar. The flames had tried to erase my past, but instead revealed my protection. It was as if my husband had seen this moment from another world. Every cruelty, every humiliation, had been leading here. I felt the weight of the letter in my hands, not heavy, but grounding. In that moment, grief turned into purpose. He hadn't just left me love, he had left me power. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that endures. The kind that burns clean. And for the first time in years, I smiled through my tears. The next morning, she noticed the change in me. I hummed while making breakfast. Peace unsettled her more than anger. She asked what I was smiling about, her tone edged with suspicion. I looked at her and said simply, "About time." She blinked, confused. She could sense something had shifted, but not what. The letter stayed hidden beneath my blouse, warm against my skin. I touched it gently, like armor made of love and foresight. She didn't know that her own cruelty had opened the door she'd meant to close. And now, every breath I took carried the scent of both smoke and revelation. Because sometimes the truth needs to burn its way out. Morning sunlight slipped through the curtains, soft and golden. It fell on the ashes scattered across the floor like gray snow. I didn't sweep them right away. Grief needs its own rituals. Instead, I brewed coffee and sat quietly, letting the warmth settle in my chest. The letter lay on the table, folded, waiting, breathing. It felt alive, humming with the energy of everything unspoken. I traced the edges of the paper as if touching the border between worlds. In those ashes, I saw not destruction but transformation. Some losses polish the soul, others prepare it. And I knew I had been prepared. She came into the room, pretending confidence. Her hair was perfect, but her eyes carried the fog of sleepless guilt. The smell of smoke still lingered around her like an invisible confession. "Are you cleaning that up today?" she asked, pointing at the ashes. I looked up and said gently, "Not yet. They're teaching me something." Her face twisted, unsure if it was mockery or madness. She reached for the broom, but I stopped her hand. "Don't," I said softly. "You might sweep away more than dust." Her grip loosened. For the first time, she obeyed. It wasn't fear of me, but of what she couldn't understand. When she left the room, I unfolded the letter again. The words seemed brighter in the morning light, alive with intent. I could almost hear my husband's voice speaking through the ink. He had left not just instructions, but faith. Faith that the truth would find me even through fire. He had written about a friend, a notary, now old but trustworthy. In his letter, he had detailed the documents stored in the man's care. My name, my rights, my safety, all the things my son never knew existed, and all the things his wife could never steal. I pressed the letter against my heart and exhaled deeply. The scent of smoke had changed, no longer bitter, but holy. It clung to me like a blessing disguised as a scar. I realized the fire hadn't been her weapon, it had been my awakening. Everything she meant to destroy had conspired to protect me. I smiled faintly at the thought, divine irony written in flame. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of her voice or her presence, because I carried a truth too sacred to be shaken. A truth that waited decades to speak through ash and courage. The kind that doesn't scream, it simply endures. That afternoon, I visited the garden, letter hidden in my pocket. The air smelled different, fresher, lighter, almost forgiving. I watered the roses, their petals curling toward the sun. The soil steamed slightly where the smoke had once settled. It felt symbolic, as if life itself was reclaiming what the fire had borrowed. From the window, I saw her watching me, suspicion in her stare. I smiled back, calm and unbothered, the kind of smile that unsettles the guilty. She didn't know I already held her downfall folded neatly in paper. I turned to the roses again and whispered, "He still protects us." And for the first time since he died, I felt him there, watching through the light. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the lamp dim, the house asleep. The letter lay before me, its edges trembling slightly in the breeze. I had read it halfway, but something inside me hesitated to go further. The air felt charged, as if truth itself were waiting behind the next sentence. I took a deep breath and unfolded the rest, my fingers cold despite the warmth. The ink had faded in places, but his voice spoke clear as prayer. He began gently, the way he always spoke when afraid of breaking my heart. "If you're reading this, my love, it means life kept its cruel promise." My eyes blurred with tears, but I kept reading, my heart both hungry and afraid. Each word felt like a thread pulling me closer to a wound long buried. He confessed things no husband wishes to leave unsaid. Secrets he had carried not out of malice, but shame. He wrote about a mistake made before our marriage, one that haunted him in silence. A fleeting affair, a sin of youth, one he had buried in secrecy and regret. He said the woman had disappeared soon after, leaving behind only whispers. But she had been part of his family circle, someone close, too close. And in that confession, the ink thickened, letters pressed harder into the page. "If by some cruel twist she ever returns to this house, forgive me, for her presence will bring you pain." My pulse stopped, the words blurred before reforming like ghosts. He ended the sentence with a name I never thought I'd read. Elena. Elena. My daughter-in-law. The name stood there, silent, burning like coal through the paper. He had known her as my son's wife. Of course, time had twisted fate in its cruel way. But suddenly, every gesture, every sneer, every strange familiarity in her eyes made sense. The way she looked around this house like it owed her something. The way she despised the dress, the symbol of a love that wasn't hers. She wasn't just cruel, she was connected. She had come back into the same home through another door, wearing another name. And fate, patient as always, had waited for the right moment to unveil its irony. The fire she started had only burned her own reflection. My breath grew heavy as I read the final paragraph. "If she ever stands before you, remember this. She carries part of what once belonged to me. Do not hate her, pity her. For what burns in her is not hatred of you, but envy of what she never received, my love." I let the letter fall into my lap, hands shaking, heart unraveling. Everything that once felt like coincidence now pulsed with design. She wasn't just here to torment me. She was here to finish a circle she didn't understand. My husband's mistake had returned to my doorstep, wearing pride as perfume. And I had mistaken karma for cruelty. The house was silent, as if listening to my revelation. I whispered his name, and the candle flickered, once, then steady again. Forgiveness tasted bitter, but it was finally within reach. I folded the letter slowly, pressing my tears into the paper. The truth didn't destroy me. It clarified me. Pain lost its venom when I understood its purpose. He hadn't left a curse. He'd left me a key to her behavior, to the fire, to the resentment in her eyes. She wasn't trying to destroy me. She was trying to erase a ghost she could never compete with. And in doing so, She had exposed herself. I placed the letter back into its envelope, my heart strangely calm. The smell of ashes still lingered, but now it felt holy. Because what she tried to burn had only illuminated what was hidden in both of us. The next morning, the house felt unnaturally still. Birds sang outside, but their song sounded far away, muffled. I sat by the window, the letter folded neatly on my lap. I didn't hide it this time. Some truths are meant to be seen. She came into the room like a storm pretending to be calm. Her eyes darted to the paper immediately, drawn to it like a moth to light. "What's that?" she asked, her voice too casual to be innocent. I looked up, smiled gently, and said, "A letter from the past." She hesitated, then stepped closer, her curiosity stronger than her caution. And that was how destiny invited her in, softly, deceptively. I let her stand beside me as I opened the envelope. The faint scent of cedar and smoke rose again, timeless and haunting. She frowned. "You still keep that burn thing?" "Some things survive fire for a reason," I replied. I began to read aloud, softly, my voice trembling like a prayer. Her expression shifted with every sentence, amusement first, then discomfort. When I reached the name Elena, her breath hitched. I looked up just in time to see the color drain from her face. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The silence between us grew louder than any scream. She stepped back as if struck, eyes wide with disbelief. "What did you say?" she whispered, voice trembling. I repeated it slowly, each syllable deliberate, merciless. "Elena." Her hands shook, and she clutched the table for balance. For a moment, I saw not a villain, but a frightened child, exposed and small. Her mask cracked, pride slipped through her fingers like sand. "You're lying," she hissed. "You made that up." I handed her the letter, calm as dawn. "Then read it yourself." She snatched it from my hand, desperate for denial. But truth doesn't care who holds it. It burns the same. Her eyes raced across the page, the words hitting her like stones. The room seemed to shrink around her, the air too thick to swallow. Her breathing grew shallow, her face pale as the ashes she had made. When she reached the last paragraph, her knees almost gave out. She looked at me with something between hatred and horror. "You knew," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know now," I said quietly. "And so do you." The letter slipped from her hand, fluttering to the floor like a fallen verdict. Her eyes filled with tears, not of remorse, but of collapse. The kind of tears that come when truth finally ends the performance. She staggered backward, shaking her head, muttering nonsense. I didn't know who he was. I didn't mean," her words tangled unfinished, dissolving into sobs. I watched in silence, not out of cruelty, but completion. There was nothing to add. The truth had already spoken. She sank into a chair, trembling, lost in the weight of her reflection. Every arrogant word, every cruel laugh, now echoed back at her. The room that once felt like her stage now became her mirror. And all she saw staring back was a woman burned by her own fire. I turned away, whispering, "Now you understand why it didn't burn." That evening, the sun dipped low, staining the sky with fire. It felt symbolic, the end of one light and the birth of another. My son came home humming, unaware of the storm awaiting him. She sat at the kitchen table, pale, shaking, eyes red but dry. When he kissed her forehead, she flinched. He frowned, confused, sensing something wrong but not yet knowing why. I stood by the counter, silent, the letter folded beside the teapot. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice carrying the calm of ignorance. She looked at me, pleading silently, but I didn't speak. Some lessons must be learned by the eyes that once refused to see. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Her breathing was uneven, shallow, desperate. "Something happened," she murmured, voice trembling. He turned toward me, confusion deepening into concern. "Mother? What is she talking about?" I slid the letter across the table without a word. He picked it up, frowning, recognizing his father's handwriting. As he read, his lips moved slowly, eyes narrowing with every line. The silence in the room grew unbearable, like waiting for a verdict. And when he reached her name, the air itself seemed to stop. He looked at her, stunned, his voice breaking. "Elena, what is this?" She shook her head violently. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." He slammed the letter onto the table, his hand trembling. "You burned her wedding dress," he said, barely above a whisper. His tone wasn't anger yet, it was disbelief, the kind that wounds deeper. "I thought you just hated her," he said. "But this is madness." She stood, tears spilling freely now, reaching for him. "Please listen to me. I didn't know who he was. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but innocence sounds hollow when spoken after destruction." He stepped back, pain clouding his face. "You mocked her, humiliated her, destroyed what she loved." His voice cracked, part rage, part heartbreak. "You burned the one thing that connected this family to him, to my father." She sobbed, clutching her chest. "I didn't understand," he cut her off. "No, you didn't want to." The words hit her harder than any slap. Her knees buckled, and she fell into the chair, defeated. He turned to me, eyes full of guilt. "Mom, I'm so sorry." I shook my head gently. "You have nothing to apologize for." For the first time in years, the house felt still, purified by truth. No one spoke for a long while. Only the clock dared to move. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing into the silence she had created. My son placed the letter back on the table, reverently, like an offering. He reached for my hand, the same hand that once held his father's. In his eyes, I saw a man awakening from a long sleep. He didn't hate her, he pitied her. And that pity was punishment enough. Her pride, once towering, now lay in ashes beside the dress she had burned. There was no vengeance, only balance. And sometimes that's the most divine kind of justice. That night, she packed a small suitcase without a word. I didn't stop her. Redemption isn't begged, it's chosen. My son watched silently, torn between duty and awakening. When she walked past me, she couldn't meet my eyes. I said nothing. Mercy, at times, is silence. The door closed softly behind her, the echo final but peaceful. My son wept, not for her, but for the illusion they had lost. I placed my hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Let her go. Some fires can't be rebuilt." He nodded, tears falling freely. And in that moment, I felt the weight of the world lift from our home. The next morning, the house was quiet again, not empty, just lighter. The echoes of argument had faded, replaced by something softer. I stood by the window, watching the dawn climb gently over the horizon. The world outside looked new, as if it, too, had decided to begin again. My son entered the kitchen slowly, his footsteps careful, heavy with guilt. He looked older than the night before, as if the truth had carved wisdom into his face. When our eyes met, he lowered his gaze, the way children do after breaking something sacred. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. I poured him coffee and replied, "Then say nothing. Just be here." Sometimes silence heals better than apology. We sat at the table without words for a long time. The sunlight spilled over the wood, touching the letter between us. It looked different now, less like pain, more like guidance. He reached out and touched it gently, reverently. "I wish I had known what she was capable of," he whispered. "You couldn't have," I said. "People show us their masks before their faces." He nodded, swallowing hard. "She's gone." "Yes," I said softly, "but so is the darkness she carried." He sighed, tears gathering quietly. "You deserved better, Mom." I smiled faintly. I got exactly what I needed, the truth. He took my hands in his, the same way his father once did. There was something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Humility. "I didn't protect you," he said. "I let her treat you like you didn't matter." I squeezed his fingers gently. "You were trying to keep peace. But peace built on silence always cracks." He nodded, tears falling freely now. "I should have listened more, seen more." I shook my head. It's not too late to start. He looked around the house. The same walls that once held laughter, then fire, now calm again. It feels different, he said. It is, I replied. Truth changes the air. We went to the backyard afterward. The garden was still damp from the night's dew. The roses that had wilted near the fire were blooming again. I knelt beside them, touching the petals softly. He joined me, silent, helping me remove the burnt leaves. It felt symbolic, two souls tending to something reborn. When he stood, he said quietly, "She called last night." I looked up, steady. "And?" She said she's leaving town. "Then let her go," I said. Some lessons bloom far from where they burned. That afternoon, we placed the letter back in its box. Not hidden, just kept, like a family heirloom reborn. He promised to guard it, to honor his father's words and my silence. We sat together until sunset, speaking little, feeling much. When he finally smiled again, it was small, but real. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't arrive with thunder. It walks quietly, barefoot, through the ashes of understanding. The house no longer smelled of smoke, only of home. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We're free." And for the first time in years, I truly believed it. The house still carried the scent of smoke, faint but eternal. It wasn't unpleasant anymore, it was sacred, like incense from a temple. Every burned corner whispered a story the fire had told in light and ash. The walls, once heavy with resentment, now stood lighter, breathing differently. It was as if truth itself had scrubbed the air clean. I walked through each room slowly, touching the furniture, the photos, the silence. Even the mirror in the hallway looked clearer, as if reflecting more than just my face. For the first time in years, I felt the house recognize me again. We had both been scarred, but both had survived. And survival, I realized, is just another word for rebirth. There was a dark patch on the floor where the box had burned. I didn't cover it. I left it there, a reminder and a warning. That black mark wasn't shame, it was scripture. Proof that lies may burn hot, but truth glows longer. I knelt beside it, tracing the edges with my fingertips. Once, this floor had heard our laughter. Then it heard our silence. Now it echoed our truth. It's strange how destruction can feel like cleansing. Some fires are punishment, others are revelation. Mine had been both, and I thanked the flames for their honesty. I thought about her, the woman who burned what she couldn't understand. She had wanted power, not peace, control, not connection. But life teaches all of us in our own language, and hers was fire. I didn't hate her anymore. Hatred keeps the ashes warm too long. I hoped the same truth that had freed me would one day reach her. Pain is a teacher that never wastes its lessons. And though she had left this house, her shadow had stayed just long enough to teach it light. The same hands that destroyed had also unveiled what was hidden. She had burned a dress, but revealed a destiny. Even her cruelty had become part of my healing. The next morning, I lit a candle where the fire had started, not to replace it, but to honor it. The flame flickered softly, golden and calm, the way truth burns when it's no longer feared. I whispered a prayer, not for revenge, but for gratitude. Because without that fire, I would never have found the letter. Without her cruelty, I would never have known his secret. And without that pain, I might never have discovered my strength. The candlelight danced across the walls, gentle where the flames once raged. There was peace now, not the fragile kind that breaks with noise, but the kind that stands quietly after the storm, knowing it earned its calm. When my son joined me, he noticed the candle. "Why here?" he asked softly. "Because truth should always have its place," I said. He nodded, his eyes full of understanding beyond words. We stood together in the quiet glow, mother and son, survivors of love and fire. He wrapped an arm around me, and I leaned into his warmth. In the flicker of the light, I saw his father's smile reflected on his face. For a moment, the three of us existed in the same breath again. Past, present, and peace. The house no longer kept secrets. It had burned every lie until only truth remained. I used to think revenge was loud, flames, shouting, punishment. But the older I get, the more I see it wears a quieter face. It looks like peace in the eyes of someone they tried to destroy. It sounds like laughter returning to a house they thought they had silenced. It tastes like morning coffee, without bitterness. My revenge didn't come through anger. It came through stillness. I stopped fighting her in my mind and let truth do the work. It didn't need my help. Guilt is a far sharper blade than hatred.
I didn't curse her when she left.
I simply wished her a long life so she could live long enough to face herself. Word spread through the family faster than I expected. People called, curious, whispering behind polite tones. They wanted gossip, not grief, but truth travels with its own dignity. I didn't tell them everything. Some stories are not for entertainment. I just said, the fire revealed what needed to be seen. They didn't understand, but they nodded as if they did. One of my sisters asked, "Don't you want her to pay for what she did?" I smiled and said, "She already is." Because guilt doesn't stop when the punishment ends. It walks beside you, echoing every cruel word you ever spoke. Sometimes, at night, I imagine her sitting alone somewhere. Maybe she still wakes up smelling smoke that isn't there. Maybe she still dreams of the fire and sees my calm face in the flames. That is the quiet revenge. Not that she remembers me, but that she remembers herself. People think peace is passive. They're wrong. Peace is the heaviest thing you can hand to someone who thrives on chaos. I never shouted at her, never humiliated her in return. I didn't need to. The truth had already taken her apart. The fire burned my dress, but the truth stripped her soul. And that's the kind of wound no one else can see, yet it never heals. I often sit in the garden now, near the roses that survived the smoke. Their petals open wider than before, as if unafraid of the sun. I water them slowly, whispering the same word over and over, forgiveness. Not for her sake, but for mine. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's refusing to carry their weight any longer. Every drop that falls on the soil feels like washing away what used to hurt. Sometimes the wind brings the faintest scent of burnt cedar, and instead of sorrow, I feel gratitude. Even fire, I realized, can be an ally if it burns in the right direction. Mine burned my pain into wisdom. The neighbors still ask if I'll ever replace the burned curtains, the blackened floor. I tell them no. Those marks are my medals, not my wounds. Each scar in this house reminds me that peace was not given, it was earned. When I pass by the mirror, I see strength where fear once lived. And though my reflection carries more lines now, it also carries light. That is my quiet revenge, to be whole where they wished me hollow, to smile where they expected bitterness, to live fully, kindly, unbroken. Because the best revenge against cruelty is joy. And joy, my dear, burns longer than any fire. The morning she left, the sky was pale and empty. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing, as if honoring the silence. She packed quietly, her movements careful, almost reverent. The woman who once filled rooms with noise now walked like a ghost. My son stood by the doorway, torn between sadness and relief. He didn't speak, and neither did I. Some moments are too sacred for words. Her suitcase clicked shut with a sound that echoed finality. She turned, eyes hollow, searching for something, forgiveness, perhaps, or absolution. But redemption doesn't live where truth is denied. It waits on the road for those brave enough to walk toward it. She paused near the burnt spot on the floor. Her gaze lingered there longer than I expected. I could see the reflection of the past flickering in her eyes. Fire, fear, shame. Her lips trembled, but no apology came. I didn't need one. The silence between us said everything words never could. I nodded gently, a farewell without bitterness. She lowered her head, gripping the handle of her suitcase tighter. For a moment, she looked smaller, not the woman who once ruled with arrogance, but the lost child my husband had written about. And in that fleeting second, I felt pity, not anger. When she stepped outside, the wind lifted a strand of her hair. The air smelled different, cleaner, lighter, like a house exhaling. She walked down the path without looking back. The gate closed behind her with a soft metallic sigh. It wasn't triumph I felt, nor sorrow, only peace. Some endings are too pure for celebration. My son came to stand beside me, his arm brushing mine. He whispered, "Will she ever come back?" I looked toward the horizon, where her figure was already fading. "If she does," I said, "it won't be as the same woman." The rest of that day passed in quiet harmony. We opened all the windows, letting sunlight and wind wash the rooms. The curtains fluttered like white flags, symbols of truce between past and present. I washed the dishes slowly, the sound of water steady and healing. My son repaired the old chair his father once used to sit in. He hummed softly, a tune I hadn't heard since childhood. The walls, once heavy with arguments, now echoed gentleness again. Peace doesn't shout, it settles. And that day, it settled everywhere, on the table, in our hearts, in the air itself. The fire had left its mark, but so had mercy. That night, I stood in the doorway and looked out at the road. The moon hung low, silver and forgiving. I whispered a prayer, not for her return, but for her awakening. Because even those who burn us are part of the fire that shapes us. Without her cruelty, I might never have remembered my strength. Without her envy, I might never have uncovered his truth. The path she walked away on was long, but it led her to her own reckoning. And I, finally, could rest, not in victory, but in grace. The house was quiet, the air clear, the night endless. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The fire destroyed the fabric, but not what it carried. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the lace against my skin. It no longer belongs to the world of things, it belongs to memory. And memory, when blessed by truth, becomes eternal. That dress was my shield, my witness, my final guardian. It had hidden love, carried confession, and survived betrayal. It had done what no human could, kept a secret safe until its time. When the flames touched it, it didn't vanish, it revealed. It burned just enough to open the past and let destiny breathe. And in doing so, it saved me. I sometimes think of it as if it were alive, not cloth, but spirit. It absorbed laughter, tears, and promises whispered long ago. Every thread was a prayer I had forgotten I'd made. My husband's letter wasn't the only thing it protected me. If she hadn't burned it, I might have died still blind to the truth. The fire she meant for harm became the light that freed me. God, or fate, or whatever force watches over old souls, had chosen the dress as a vessel. And it fulfilled its purpose in the most poetic way possible, through destruction. Now, when I see the ashes in that corner, I no longer feel pain. I see only deliverance stitched in smoke. One afternoon, I gathered what remained, a few pieces of lace, half burned. I placed them inside a small wooden frame. They looked fragile, but their presence filled the room with strength. I hung it above the bed, right where the light touches every morning. People who visit ask why I keep that ruin on the wall. I just smile and say, because it saved me. They don't understand. Salvation rarely looks beautiful. It comes disguised as loss, wrapped in ashes, carried by fire. And sometimes, what's destroyed on earth is preserved in spirit. My dress didn't die, it ascended. At night, I dream of it often, not as it burned, but as it once was, white, luminous, alive. In those dreams, I walk through a field of light, wearing it again. The fabric feels warm, but not from heat, from love. I hear my husband's laughter in the distance, calling me softly. He says, "You kept your promise." I reach for his hand, but the dream fades before I can touch him. Still, I wake with peace instead of sorrow. Because I know he's not gone, he's just waiting at the edge of time. And the dress, his final gift, was the bridge between our worlds. The last piece of it rests in my cedar box, next to the letter. I keep it not as a relic, but as a reminder that what is meant to reach us will always find its way, even through fire. That love doesn't vanish. It transforms. That pain, when endured with faith, turns into light. I touch the fabric sometimes and whisper, "We made it." And though it's silent, I swear it answers me, not in words, but in calm. Because the dress wasn't just part of my past. It became the guardian of my soul. And through its ashes, I was reborn. We all carry a fire within us, some gentle, some wild. Most of the time, we spend our lives trying to control it. We call it anger, pride, passion, love, names that barely touch its depth. But fire, like truth, doesn't exist to destroy. It exists to reveal. It burns away illusions, strips away false peace, and exposes what's real. When mine came, I thought it came to punish me.
But it came to wake me.
It showed me that everything I thought I lost was never gone. It had simply changed its form, waiting for me to see. I used to believe strength meant enduring quietly, never breaking. But now I know strength is in breaking beautifully, letting pain carve wisdom into the soul. We are all furnaces of memory, love, and loss. And life, in its strange mercy, knows when to strike the match. The flames don't ask permission. They arrive when the lesson is ready. Mine came dressed as betrayal, carrying a lighter in manicured hands. But even through that cruelty, the divine spoke. Because sometimes God whispers through pain, and sometimes he roars through fire. Either way, he always speaks. When I walk through the house now, I no longer smell smoke. I smell cedar, roses, and peace, the holy trinity of my healing. The blackened floor, the framed lace, the letter, they are not relics. They are reminders of what truth costs and what it gives in return. I light a candle every Sunday, not for mourning, but for memory. It flickers softly, gold against the quiet walls. And every time I see its flame, I think of the dress. How it burned, how it revealed, how it saved. The fire that once consumed now keeps me warm. And that, I've learned, is grace. Sometimes I wonder if she ever found peace. If somewhere far away, she looks at her own ashes and finally understands. Because we all meet our fire eventually, no one escapes it. For some, it comes as loss, for others as truth. But it always burns away the lies we tell ourselves. And when the smoke clears, only the soul remains, raw, unhidden, honest. That is the quiet miracle of pain. It purifies. And when it's done, we no longer fear the dark. Because we realize the light was never outside of us. It was hidden all along, inside the fire. So if you ever smell smoke in your life, don't run from it. Stand still. Watch what it tries to show you. Sometimes, what feels like destruction is only revelation in disguise. The heart, after all, is a house built of rooms we haven't opened yet. And fire, divine, painful, necessary, is what unlocks them. My fire came through her hands, through my loss, through love itself. And though it burned everything I knew, it left me only with what mattered. The truth.
The peace.
The self that can't be touched by flame. The dress may be gone, the house changed, the years passed, but the light it revealed will live in me forever.